Hi, this is Nahi, and welcome to Three Ways We Stay Stuck and How to Break Free. So I'll tell you the three ways first. One is we stay stuck in our situation. Two is we stay stuck in our struggle. And three is we stay stuck in our story. So what do I mean by all this? And what do you do about it? Let's start with getting stuck in the situation. So to illustrate what happens here, let's talk about you and your spouse or significant others. And you happen to be in a conversation. And let's say that you asked your spouse if they would like to make plans for this weekend and what they'd like to do. And he says, we'll just pretend that you're a woman and your spouse is a man. And you say, where would you like to go? And he's like, I don't know. I don't know where I'd like to go. It's, today's Wednesday and you're talking about Saturday. I mean, how would I possibly know that? But what you're trying to do is make plans. And so you keep asking and asking because you're pretty sure that you're going to be doing something. You ask him if he has any other plans. He doesn't. And finally he says, sure, let's go out to eat. And you say, well, where do you want to go? And again, he doesn't tell you. And finally you say, well, what about the Mexican place? And he says, sure, the Mexican place that we like. So come along Saturday night and you're starting to get ready and you say, okay, let's go. And he says, you know what? I don't really feel like going. And then you start getting into a fight. And you say, we planned to go out, but now you're backing out and you're really hurt and you're having a hard time understanding what went on. And it feels like this goes on in your relationship a lot. And meanwhile, he's saying, hey, you pushed me. You pushed me to agree last Wednesday. And how in the world was I supposed to know on Wednesday how I'd be feeling tonight? Why don't we just stay in? So as you go back and forth in this bickering, both of you, it kind of strikes you that this happens all the time. And that's a clue. If you're feeling like something happens all the time and it's a repeating pattern, you want to look at the pattern, not the situation. So we tend to get stuck, on the surface looking at the situation. But what we don't do is look underneath at the pattern. And in this case, in your mind, this happens all the time. The pattern is that he doesn't seem to want to do things with you. You keep asking him to do things. You try to get him to decide what you want to do. And it just doesn't ever seem that when it comes time to do whatever you plan to do, that he's really into that thing. And that feels kind of hurtful. And in his mind, the pattern's different. In his mind, he also feels like it happens all the time. He feels like you're trying to pin him down to do different things. And then, you're not really paying attention to how he feels. And so he has to do things, whether he likes it or not, he kind of feels like they're trying to control him. So in this case, if you go just a little bit under the surface, we can use a tool that many of you are probably already familiar with. It's called the Myers Briggs. And the two of you have different basic styles of how you like to do things. And it turns out that in this example, you're more of a J. So you need to plan so that you know how to prepare. So for you, you feel more settled when you know what it is that you're going to be doing ahead of time because you like to plan and prepare knowing that. On the other hand, he falls under the P side of the spectrum. So the J and P is sort of just one dimension of the Myers Briggs. And as a high P, he needs options. So he doesn't feel trapped. So for him, he really hates being committed to something and then being in a situation and not wanting to do it, especially on the weekend when it's supposed to be his time. He really wants to kind of flow with his weekend and see how he feels and make choices in the moment based on how he feels, which is exactly the opposite of what you like to do. You like to plan things in advance, and that allows you to prepare more. But just knowing this empowers you. And you can't know this unless you look at the pattern and you get out of the situation and go just a little bit deeper. So knowing that you're a J and a P, you can begin to problem solve together. So for example, maybe you say, well, what if we had 3 options? So we know that we're actually going to do something together on Saturday night. So that's a given, and I can plan for that. But we don't have to decide what we're going to do. Maybe we say we have 3 options. One is if we don't really feel like going out, we can stay in and we can maybe order out and watch a movie. And if we go out, we can either go out to someplace with lots of people, if we're feeling like socializing, or we can go out one-on-one. And maybe if we go out one-on-one, we go to this favorite Mexican restaurant that we have. And maybe if we go out with lots of people, we have a place that plays music and we really like mingling with people that show up there. And as you offer that option, he thinks, well, that would work out fine because that allows me to commit, but still honor my ability to choose based on how I feel. So I can see how I feel. And if I want to go out and socialize, then we know what we're going to do. If I want to stay home, I can stay home. And that feels pretty comfortable to me. So 2 people who have been arguing and feel very, very stuck in their relationship sometimes can just go a little bit deeper to something as simple as, their Myers Briggs style differences to find some new insight that provides a path forward. Okay, so that's just one example of how you can look underneath the situation. The real clue here is you want to look at the pattern. So if you feel stuck, a situation will continue to repeat itself, but in different context. And if you can look at what's the pattern under the context, that's where you'll find the source of what's getting you stuck, and that can provide a path forward to getting you unstuck. All right, well, let's talk about our second scenario here, struggle, staying in struggle. So my example for struggle is a common one that I have with a lot of clients who are business owners or who are professionals, and they're in a position where they need to sell themselves, maybe even if you're in transition. And you've got to reach out to people, and that can be kind of uncomfortable, especially if you might get rejected. And it's just a very insecure place to be. And so many people find themselves procrastinating, and they make commitment after commitment, especially my clients who are business owners who are, trying to get themselves to make more sales calls, and they might go to one sales training and then another sales training, and they still find themselves in the same position where no matter what new technique they learn or process they learn, they still find themselves procrastinating on reaching out to people. So here we have, I promised I'd make those sales calls. I procrastinated yesterday and I need to push myself through it today. So the staying stuck in the struggle, what that means is you just keep trying to use more willpower to push yourself through. And you may be, successful for part of the time, but generally you fall back into your same patterns. And the reason is because you're using pure willpower to get yourself to do something you really don't want to do. And that willpower runs out. It's based on energy. So when you're stuck in a struggle, you also want to go just a little bit deeper and try to find out what's going on under the struggle. Usually, when you're facing internal resistance, there's a really good reason. That's why when people feel like they have an inner rebel or an inner procrastinator and they think that part of themselves is bad, it needs to be stomped out, I will always say there is not one part of you that isn't trying its best to serve you, even if it's not doing a very good job of it. So in this case, we look at the situation, what we'll call her Susie salesperson. What Susie salesperson is dealing with, and what she's dealing with is I want to grow my business, and that means making sales calls, but I don't want to make people uncomfortable by pushing my products on them. That's just really awkward to me, and it doesn't make any sense. So we ask her to look a little bit deeper and see, kind of what's the value underneath both sides of the story, because you're definitely stuck here. Okay, well, I want to grow my business. That means making sales calls. And I don't want to make people uncomfortable by pushing my products on them. I value success in growing my business. And I also value building positive and mutually respectful relationships. So sometimes we'll play this game of changing the but to the and, where we'll say, put the two parts of your struggle against each other and say, I want to do this, but I want to do this. And as long as you're clear that that's what's going on in your mind, changing the but to an and can open your mind up to new possibilities. Because instead of trying to make one side win and scrunch the other part of yourself down, what you're trying to do is honor both sides. And the way to do that is to take the but and the and change it to a how. How do I grow my business through building positive and respectful relationships? How do I build positive and respectful relationships that lead to business growth? So how do I do both? How do I honor both sides of the struggle? Most of the time, when you find any kind of internal resistance, it might show up in procrastination, it might show up in what you feel like is an inner rebel. That resistance is standing for something that's important to you that you are not acknowledging. So the most powerful thing you can do is almost the reverse of what you would think you need to do. What you might think you need to do is push yourself harder or use more willpower. But what actually tends to work better is if you get curious about what's the rebel standing for? What's my resistance standing for? What is it that's important to me that part of me is trying to protect by making me not do this thing that I'm pretty sure I want to do? And what you'll find out is you really are stuck because you have two conflicting values. But once you have those in your awareness, then you can begin to brainstorm. Well, how can I honor both of these values instead of pit them against each other? So that's situation and struggle. What's the third way we get stuck? The third way we stay stuck is staying stuck in our story. So we always tell ourselves a story to explain whatever situation we are in. So if we're in a negative situation, we usually come up with a negative story to explain it. So for example, in this situation, we're going to use exercise or somebody that's not sticking to their exercise plan. We'll call her Sharon. Sharon is really frustrated because she keeps making exercise plans up and she gets started and she starts off well, maybe for a couple of weeks, and then she just gets exhausted and starts putting it off and just doesn't stick to it. She's very mad at herself. And in her mind, she's saying, I'm such a loser. Everyone else can do this, and I'm just a fat, lazy slob. And it turns out that that story just makes her feel more and more miserable. But the thing is that we create the stories to explain our situations. And if we can just acknowledge that we made up a story, that creates a little bit of space between the situation and the story. And you begin to realize, well, maybe that's not the only reason that this is going on. And maybe I don't have to feel so bad about myself. So one of the tools that's really powerful that my clients love using is what we call the balloon model, and you'll see why in a minute. But the idea is that I think about the difference between what are the facts of what I'm experiencing and what's the part that I'm telling myself, what's my explanation or my interpretation of the facts. And in this case, for Sharon, she's not sticking to her exercise plan. That's for sure a fact. But the part about her being a loser, that's her explanation. That's her story. So the story that she's making up to explain why she's not sticking to her exercise plan is that she's a lazy loser. And it's a balloon. That's why this is called the balloon model. And you'll see why in a minute. Once we separate the facts of our situation with our interpretation, or the story that we're making up about the situation, then we can get curious and say, well, what other possible stories could be true about this situation? What other possible perspectives could they be? And we go through an exercise where we try to create at least 4 or 5 different possibilities. So in this case, maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe sticking to exercise programs is hard for everybody. And maybe this is just going to be hard. Maybe it's normal that it's hard for me. Maybe I'm doing, comparing myself to other people and I'm only seeing them when they show up at the gym, but I'm not seeing them when they don't show up at the gym. and I'm not noticing that. Or maybe failure is part of change. I've heard all these things about growth mindset, and I've heard that, embracing your failures is really what gets you to change. And so maybe I should start thinking about my failures as just part of the process. And maybe the most successful people in the world, maybe they struggle as well. And so as I think about all of these different possibilities, I now have an option to choose one of the other explanations for my story. And the thing that's really important to understand is that each explanation, if it were the explanation, would make you feel a different way. So if the explanation really is, I'm a lazy loser, you're going to feel like crap. But if the explanation is, I'm not the only one, you might feel a little bit better about yourself. And each one of these balloons is representing an explanation for a situation that makes you feel differently. And here is a very important thing to keep in mind. When you feel differently, your feelings drive your behavior. So if I believe that I'm a lazy loser, I'm going to be drained of energy and I'm not going to have a lot of natural motivation. If I'm feeling like successful people struggle, then I'm going to see the fact that I'm struggling as a sign that I'm a successful person. And that may give me a little bit more resilience or willpower. So each explanation is different. The reason we call this the balloon model, in addition to the fact that I put all the explanations in balloons, is that the idea is try on all the different explanations and pop the balloons that you don't like and stick with the balloon that you like the best, that makes you feel the best. Well, why would I do that? Because I'm stuck in, well, what's the real truth about the matter? The thing is, the truth actually doesn't matter, because the feelings that are created by each perspective govern your behavior and the energy that you put out. And that behavior and that energy actually influences the world around you. So every belief that you have works as a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I could do hours of video just on that, but I'm not going to, other than to say that because our beliefs and our perspectives act like self-fulfilling prophecies, you can ask yourself, if anything you believed would become more likely to happen just because you believed it, what would you believe? And then we go through and we ask Sharon, well, which of these would you choose to think as your reason for why you're not sticking to your exercise plan? Well, I'm a loser. That one doesn't feel good. And you know what? The one that feels the best for me is that failure is a part of change. So I can look at the fact that I'm not sticking to my exercise plan. I could see that not as a sign that I'm a loser, but as a sign that this is part of the process. And now, since I failed, I'm supposed to learn from my failure. So maybe by the third week, I need to plateau a little bit and do lighter exercise. Or maybe I need to do shorter workouts until I build the habit up. Or maybe I need to just do 10 minutes when I don't feel like doing it. But now I can get curious and I can start brainstorming because I see failure as part of the process. All right, so let's summarize the 3 ways that we stay stuck. We get stuck in the situation, we get stuck in the struggle, we get stuck in the story. How do you break free? If you're stuck in the situation, what you want to do is look a little bit deeper for what the pattern is and what might be driving the pattern or causing the pattern. If you're stuck in the struggle, you look a little bit deeper for the values conflict that could be causing the struggle. What is the positive intention between the rebel or the resistance that I'm experiencing inside? It's probably standing for something that's important. And when you can bring that important thing up to the surface, you can honor both values. If you're stuck in the story, remind yourself that you're always telling yourself a story to explain situations you're in, and consider alternative explanations. And then choose the one that feels good, because if you choose the one that feels good, you're going to have a different outlook and your behavior is actually going to influence the situation to make it more like the perspective that you chose. All right, well, just want to tell you that looking deeper into what's just below the surface can make all the difference in the world in terms of empowering you to have a happier life, have a more effective life. So if you have any questions about this at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to talk with you.